Welcome to the Evangelisation Conference Ignite 2020 from the Dominicans, St Mary's, Pope's Quay in Cork.
So you're very welcome back. I hope all those who are joining us here in St Mary's for Ralph Martin's extremely informative talk really enjoyed that, and some great advice and also challenges for us all to consider our role and how we try and evangelise, how we come to know the faith and then how we come to pass it on, because the church is always missionary and all of us as members of the body of Christ have a role to play, particularly because we've received this great gift that we're celebrating today of the Holy Spirit who empowers us. So we hope that as you're continuing to watch this conference and be informed by it, that it's giving you ideas. It's not rocket science, as Ralph said, on how we go about sharing our faith. There's simple ways in which we can do it. We all have contact with different people every day. There's those water cooler moments, as was mentioned before, over the cup of tea, that I think Father Morris spoke about before. So yes, there's lots of different things. Anyway, it looks like we have our panel here for our conference on, or for our panel discussion on culture and evangelization. So we have Fr Conor here on the screen first. So I suppose I'll introduce you first, Fr Conor. Would that be fair enough?
Absolutely.
You're very welcome. So Fr Conor is originally from Galway, but he's currently based in our House of Studies there in Dublin, St Saviour's Priory. Myself and Conor actually entered Dominicans together, so we've been on a journey together over the past few years. So it's been a lot of fun, hasn't it, Conor? And continues to be. So Conor is teaching in the Studium. We have several of our students up there, so Conor is involved in teaching theology there. He's also keeps himself very active with preaching, lecturing, being involved in debates and writing theological articles and getting the good word of the gospel out there. He also hosts a monthly C.S. Lewis book club, which I hadn't heard of before, but it makes perfect sense, going through all the different works of C.S. Lewis with a group of young adults and students, so that sounds very interesting. And he's also involved in running a yearly theological summer school called the Aquinas Institute, which happens to go through the works of St. Thomas Aquinas. Again, people invited in, lay people, and they just dive into the riches of the Summa Theologica left to us by our great St. Thomas Aquinas. So, Conor, you're very welcome. I'm just going to introduce some of our other panel members for the people at home, and then we'll begin our discussion. Okay, so next up we have Greg Daly. Greg, are you there?
I am indeed.
Okay, Greg, we'll get you on screen now in just a second.
Oh, I am here.
There you are, Greg. Welcome. Good to see you.
You too, Damien.
Greg is based in Drogheda at the moment, but he's currently from Dublin, and he's studied and taught at UCD and in the University of Manchester. And it was actually at UCD, providentially, that myself and Greg first met. Greg used to be my tutor in classics, and then we fell out of contact for many years, and the two of us independently came back to our faith, and we met at a faith event, and we kept in touch ever after that. And then Greg was also a novice here in St Mary's with us for a period of time as well. So Greg is very familiar with where we're broadcasting from here at the moment. So it's good to have you on board, Greg. Greg is also responsible for books on Roman warfare and on the church in the 1916 Rising. He's been a member of Catholic Voices in the UK, a UK and Ireland correspondent for Alatea, and assistant editor of the Irish Catholic newspaper. He's now a freelance journalist, and he's currently working on a digital magazine which seeks to bring a Catholic lens to bear on all aspects of culture while nurturing fresh Irish talent. So obviously very relevant for our discussion today, Greg, so we look forward to hearing your input on that. Okay, if I may introduce then Rachel Sherlock. Are you there?
Hello.
Hi, Rachel. You're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Lovely to be here.
So Rachel works in publishing as a marketeer and is also a freelance writer and podcaster. She's originally from Kilkenny, but she now lives and works in Dublin. She's involved in a range of Catholic initiatives, including Youth 2000 and Night Fever, as well as Called to More, which Katie Ascough spoke about yesterday. It's a new Catholic evangelisation website. Her real passion is in literature and culture. She studied music and English at UCC and went on to do a master's at the University of Nottingham in Viking and Anglo-Saxon studies, where her dissertation was on dragons. Wow. I don't know if I've ever heard of a dissertation on dragons before. That must be unique. Fair play to you. Her writing and podcast work focuses on exploring the world of literature and culture through a Catholic perspective. You're very welcome, Rachel. Again, we look forward to having your input in this. And last but not least, we have Andrew Ascough. Andrew, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
You're very welcome, Andrew. Good to have you on board.
Thank you.
So,
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Andrew grew up in Dublin, where he started his journey as a filmmaker and a musician and entrepreneur. He is an award-winning director and published musician as of last year. Andrew looks to create projects that will have a lasting impact, bringing people closer to truth and goodness. Very good. So Andrew, as we mentioned there in the introduction, being a musician, we can see the guitar in the background there. So Andrew produced an award-winning music video, which we're going to show later on in our panel discussion. So stay tuned for that. It's an excellent piece of work and an original, completely original score piece that you've put together and received an award for. So we look forward to showing that later on. Okay, so let's get into our discussion, if we may. So Rachel, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. So obviously our topic for this panel is evangelization and culture. So let's just start with the most basic question. What do we mean by culture? Let's frame our conversation with that.
Yeah. Well, by culture, we mean the things that we make and do that sort of go beyond pure functionality, and the things that we are creating that we want to bestow beauty and meaning onto. So, some of it can have an element of functionality if we look at something like architecture, and then some of it is purely aesthetic or decorative, like sculpture or music. But they are the things that we as a community and as a society are trying to, I guess, express ourselves through, the things that we want to put more of our kind of love and attention into. And so they're quite reflective of the things that we value and the things that we, and the principles that we hold, actually, that when we look at the culture that we create, not only does it allow us to be inspired by the craftsmanship that produced it, and the hopefully the beauty that it creates and impresses on us, but also that it tells us something about ourselves and what we find interesting, and also something about the people who made it and the values that they hold and the interests and passions that they have. So it connects us throughout all of time, where you can look through the culture of humanity throughout history and find the common threads of interest, or distinguish ourselves by saying, well, this is something that we did in the past and we're not so interested in that anymore. But at the same time, it does have that effect of showing us that our humanity can be expressed in a variety of ways, but with sort of repeating themes throughout history.
Great. Thanks a million. So let's look at culture then from a Christian perspective, from a Christian view. Like, why should we worry about the world of culture? And like, if we're focused on heaven, our ultimate goal, should that not be our primary concern? Like, why should we be thinking about reading and writing books, or writing music, or producing paintings and sculptures? Like, if all this is kind of passing by and we're kind of journeying through, and it's not our true home, like, why should we be concerned by it? What do we have maybe to give, to contribute? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that the instinct to create things is both good and natural, and it comes to us from God. The author J.R. Tolkien has a whole theory about this called subcreation, but to kind of distill it down into a single quote of his, he says that we make in our measure and in our derivative mode because we are made, and not only made, but made in the image and likeness of a maker. So what he's saying there is that God is a creator. In fact, he's the creator of everything. And so when we create, we are trying to emulate the example that he has given us. And that is a good thing. I think anyone who's been around a small child who's sort of trying to copy you, even like answering phones, or if you sweeping the floor and they've got their little toy brush and they're sweeping it behind you, the kind of delight that can instill. It's a very small thing, but the fact that they're trying to be like you is a beautiful thing in and of itself. And all that we do in art and culture has an element of that to it. I mean, I do embroidery, and I've actually just finished a piece it was like a spray of blackberries. And so, I got my green thread and I sewed something into the shape of a leaf, and I got lots of little black beads and I sewed them together to make like a cluster that looked like blackberries. And that's obviously a really small thing, but I think when you have the right perspective, you can see that what I'm actually doing there is paying tribute to the God that sowed real blackberries into the fabric of the world, that there's a sense that even the small things that we do are paying tribute to the incredible beauty of creation that God has given us. We've seen the beauty, and in our own small way, we want to copy it and make our own little versions of it. And I think when we are really succeeding in art and beauty, when we're succeeding, we create beauty, and beauty is something that Christians can't afford to neglect. It's one of our most important paths to knowing God. It's, there's the transcendental path. You might take the path of truth, where you're looking at the scriptures, or you're looking at philosophical arguments for God and try and evangelize the world with them. Or you might take the path of good and say, look at the good works, look at the charity of these people, look at the saints and the incredible things that they did with their lives. And those are really good, but there's another way, which is beauty. And I think that's a really attractive way for people to evangelize, especially those who have turned their backs on the church, or who don't know anything about the church, that beauty is something that can strike you even when you're not kind of expecting it to, and it can take you in. And I think what beauty does is it turns you from looking inwards to looking outwards, that you see your own place in this great cosmic creation that is so beautiful and impressive that it leads you to ask a question about the nature of your existence. The author G.K. Chesterton made this great analogy in his book Orthodoxy, where he compared humanity to a man who has forgotten his name, and not only forgotten it, but forgotten to even ask that he might have a name. He's forgotten the concept of having a name. Mm-hmm. And he says that so much of modern life is about, making you forget to ask that question, turning you in on yourself, making you forget that there's an essential truth about yourself that you've forgotten. And he says that all that is spirit and art and ecstasy only mean for that one awful instant we remember that we forget. Art and culture doesn't necessarily have all of the answers, but what it does is it reminds you to ask a question, and those questions are so important, and they lead you on the road to salvation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. I think the whole idea of beauty captivating and being able to be surprised by it, because we know all beauty comes from God. He's the ultimate creator. So it can, draw us in and raise our minds and hearts to the transcendent, to something beyond, So it has a power in itself, as you say. Thank you very much, Rachel. Great. So, Conor, if I may turn to you for a second. As Catholics, we always look to the early church as a model. How did early Christians view the pagan culture around them? And how might that be relevant to us today?
It's a great question. I first of all, like to echo what Rachel said, just with a statistic. In a recent survey of young British Christians, young people who had become Christian in recent years, nearly a fifth of them had actually begun their journey to Christ because of an experience they had in a beautiful cathedral or a beautiful church. That's where their journey to salvation began, just as Rachel described. Yeah. But today is the Feast of Pentecost, and we see today the apostles going out from the upper room, going out into all the many cultures which they'll encounter over the following decades. They begin as kind of a monocultural group. They're all Jews, and they all have the same cultural background. They tell the same stories. They know the same history and so on. They sing the same songs. And as they go out, they meet all these strange and different cultures where they worship different gods, many gods. They sacrifice to these gods. And all in places like Corinth or Antioch or Philippi or Rome, all of the art, all of the architecture, the music, it has this worship of these false gods woven into it. And so for many early Christians, they actually, because they thought of these gods as demons, they thought of all of this pagan culture as demonic and something to be despised. We have our own Christian culture, and we put up barriers between our culture and the pagan culture around us. But there were other Christians as well, maybe a bit more discerning, who they found a line in the book of Exodus that inspired them. It was about the Jews leaving Egypt and taking the gold of Egypt with them. And many of them quote this line to say that what we need to do when we face these cultures is to look for the gold, look for what is good and true and beautiful in these cultures, and then use it to express the gospel in a way that the people like the Romans, for example, who love Roman art and music and poetry, to express our faith in a way that they will recognize something they love in it. And so different people have different ways of expressing this, like finding the seeds of the gospel, fragments of the word, and so on. But what they're doing really is trying to evangelize by means of learning about other cultures and then taking in what is best in those cultures in order to speak the gospel more clearly.
Great. Thanks, Conor. Yes, it's, you often see sometimes that there's a kind of a retreat from the world rather than engaging, you know what I mean? Thinking that, we look out to the culture and it's gone so far away from the Christian ideals that, is there any hope of drawing it back? But again, that doesn't achieve anything if we just retreat, or if we don't engage, if we don't try and find the seeds of the word, or we don't try and propose the gospel message all the way through. It's so important. It's our key role as Christians is to engage with the culture.
Absolutely. And different people will do it in different ways. For some people, it will be important to have a kind of a retreat, and different temperaments will work in different ways as well. That's fine. But I think in the early church, we see the fruitfulness and the confidence of these Christians who were actually willing to do the hard work of finding the gold in the midst of all the muck.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Conor. Andrew, can I turn to you for a minute?
Of course, yeah.
It's just if we've had a lot of great glories in the history of Christian culture. There's been so much art, and we still have these beautiful cathedrals that Conor spoke about that have been around for hundreds of years. Why do we need to make anything new? Like you, as we said at the start, you write music. Why not just stick with Gregorian chant or remix it like some people have done? Why you use new media instead of just sticking with what has been tried and tested?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it does bring up, in some ways, the argument of, has our taste evolved, has our taste changed, or has it deteriorated? But that conversation aside, I think it's really important that we recognize our mission as Christians, as Catholics, to go out into the world and to share the message of the gospel with people who are alive today, people who are living in this culture today. I believe it's our duty to communicate with those people as effectively as we can. And it's interesting, the gospel today was speaking about the apostles on Pentecost, as it is Pentecost Sunday. And you see that the crowd are all kind of baffled. They recognize that the apostles are speaking in their native tongue. They're speaking in a familiar tongue to them. And I think that's what we're supposed to mimic in some way as a part of our mission as Christians. Finding the language that people understand and bringing the message of the gospel through that medium. So I guess in some sense you could say language was that medium when the apostles were speaking. But today it's not just language that can help communicate the gospel. It's actually also art, and art in any form. Like my particular form being film and music, but literally any form of art can communicate. Now it just so happens we're in a culture where music and film are massive and are shared. Like it's just so easy to access them and to share media and music. So it's a great place to be as a Catholic, trying to make an impact, trying to make a change, and trying to show the goodness of the gospel. Because there's just so much attention drawn to those areas, and it's a good opportunity for us to slip in, and give some good news. So I'd say that's the basis of what I would say to that question.
Great. Yeah, no, I think you're right. You hit the nail on the head when you're talking about the language. Every culture that the gospel has to be proposed to has to be extended, not just in the language of the country, but in a new way that people can engage with and understand. And said we're immersed in a media culture that everybody is savvy with, and everybody has a smartphone, and as you said, that sharing is so simple. Now, just as an example of that, obviously you said about the song that you produced and you got an award for. We'd like to show an example of that, of some of the work you've done in showing your music video. So if we're able to show that now, for all those watching at home, we give you an example of one way in which we can try and engage with the culture and propose the gospel through this form of media.
I could act it out for you right here.
I see you right now, and my heart is breaking down. I need to know your mercy. Ransom me from my captive, I'm all begun, and I don't know where I came from. I've forgotten my home. Oh, I've forgotten my home. I don't want to fall. I would give it all just to know you again. Oh, just to know you again. 'Cause my heart burns out for you all, and the darkness has no hand on me now. Protected by your blood and called as your own, I will find my way home. Cure me of the shadows in which I was born, and show me what my heart is truly for. I wish nothing for myself. Oh, nothing for myself. Nothing I have could ever be more than you, my creator, whom I adore. I renounce my ways, for it's in your refuge I'll stay. I don't want to fall. I would give it all just to know you again. Oh, just to know you again. 'Cause my heart burns out for you all, and the darkness has no hand on me now. Protected by your blood and called as your own, I will find my way protected by your blood and called as your own. You will guide me home. You will guide me home.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, we'll just get you on screen. We just have Connor here at the moment. Just 1 second, and we'll have you back on. Keep
Yeah, no
smiling,
worries.
Connor. Andrew, is Andrew there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
There you are, Andrew. Perfect.
You hear
got
me?
back.
There we go.
Yes, got you perfectly. So fair play. When I first saw that a few days ago when we were looking at it, I just thought it was powerful. And I'm not just saying that because you're here in the panel. There's certain things of Christian music that I won't like, but that really resonated with me. It's because it's raw and it's real, and it's like a cry out to God. And it just struck me like St. Augustine. our hearts are restless until they rest in you. We can walk away from God, and so much of our culture thinks that we don't need God, we can get on fine with it, everything's grand. God gets pushed in the background, and something maybe leads them to their knees, and they just kind of go, or they're carrying burdens like you were depicting in the video, and the cross is getting heavy and they cry out. So I think that can really resonate. So we were talking about the idea of a language. I think there's a language in that video that can touch hearts. So how has the response been to it yourself? How have you found the reaction to it?
Thank you. Yeah, the response has been really wonderful. Honestly, the process of that song was just doing my best to communicate the truth. I think that's what makes it effective. And the response has been excellent because it's just the truth. And people just respond so well to truth. They can resonate with it in ways that they don't understand sometimes. I've had a few messages and letters just explaining kind of different scenarios people or different situations people have been in where they're struggling with their faith, or they have questions about their faith, or it's just difficult living their faith. And the song just helped them feel somewhat accompanied on the road, and helped them to walk a little further, So that's the impact that I've heard of so far, which is, it's just so exciting to receive. Especially, it takes a lot of work to make music, and shooting music videos in the snow is not fun. That's something I learned. But no, thank God, the response has been great. Great,
wonderful. Because I say, St. John Paul II was always speaking about the new evangelization and it being new in method. And here's, a new method that's being used in media and stuff like that, so they can be used to always promote the gospel, which is what it should be used for. So fair play for doing that. Greg, if I can turn to you. So we've been talking about, the cultural impact of new media and the ways of proposing the gospel, but with all the political and social battles on our hands, and there's many, is it worth spending the time producing art? Or aren't there more important things that we can do rather than just read books? I see you've a lot in your background there, or listen to music. What other things should we be engaged in, or what can we do?
Yeah, there's a few things going on there, I think. There's always something more urgent that we can look at and say, maybe we should be doing that instead. I read once years ago, somebody saying there's no big apocalypse, there is instead an endless sequence of little ones, because the world's always ending for somebody. So there always seems to be something more important and impressive and more pressing than culture. On top of that, when you talk about political and social battles that we need to fight, there's more than one way of doing that. You don't have to meet everything head on. And quite often, if you're a minority, meeting things head on is the worst thing you can do, because you'll just get steamrollered. You need kind of other approaches. And we know this from our own history as the story of nationalism in Ireland, even that way, where you look back in the 19th century and you have physical force nationalism, that becomes political nationalism. That becomes cultural nationalism then for a while. That's what the Celtic revival is and all that stuff. It's an attempt at kind of forging a nation and giving an imagination to the Irish in general. And then that becomes social and economic nationalism. And then before too long, it's actual independence. So there's a lot of ways we can do things. And I think it's important to say, just because you're doing culture doesn't mean you're running away from a fight. I think it's very important to allow us not to be kind of cast in that way. I said about, if we're a minority, you can get steamrollered if you do things wrong. Pope Benedict said back in the day, he talked about how if we're to have any future as Christians in the world going forward, we have to be a creative minority. Mm-hmm. And I think we talk about that a lot. And we tend to focus on the minority part of it. There aren't many of us. How can we survive? How can we go forward? I think the creative bit is at least as valuable here. We can't just be kind of sustaining ourselves on old supplies. We can't just be depending on other people to feed us. We have to create. We have to actually find ways of communicating our culture, our faith, our beliefs to each other and to others. That's kind of the Pope Francis idea, the kind of the missionary disciples thing. It's not enough just to maintain ourselves for what we've got. We've got to reach out, and that involves learning to talk the language of society at large. learning to talk their cultural language at large. I mean, it's absolutely vital that we do that. There's a great phrase from Flannery O'Connor in one of her letters where she says the air that we breathe nowadays is nihilism. It's the gas that we live in. And if it weren't for the church, we'd just basically all wind up becoming nihilists. We'd abandon all sense of our virtues and all sense of hope of what we're meant to be and who we're meant to be. I saw a wonderful and fascinating quote the other day online. It wasn't from a Christian, and it wasn't even shared by a Christian, but what it was about was somebody saying they were fed up of seeing relationships and marriages on television which are defined by their dysfunction. They're defined by infidelity, they're defined by fighting, by cheating, whatever it might be. Now, the person wasn't saying those aren't real things, but what they're saying is maybe we should be looking for healthier examples of what relations should be, what relationships should look like, and we should be looking to better models of this. It's almost as though our society, somewhere along the way, took on board Tolstoy's idea that all happy marriages are similar, and basically drama and interestingness exists in looking at unhappy ones. Well, maybe we need to find a way of making the healthy attractive and to communicate that with people. I was really struck a few months ago, maybe about a year ago now, when BBC did a TV series based on the novel Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. And neither of those are Christians in any way, though in a convoluted way, they're crucial to having brought me back to the faith. But the novel and the show is about an angel and a demon on Earth basically trying to avert the apocalypse. And the guy who played the angel, Michael Sheen, was interviewed about it at the time. And he said he has an issue with people who always say it's more fun to play someone bad, more fun to play someone evil. He says, I think we failed as a species if good is boring to us. If we see good as boring, we're doing something wrong. So these are the kind of things that we need to be able to do, is to show that goodness is interesting and worthwhile and hopeful. And that's part of the game in terms of creating culture. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you're talking about minority there, and a creative minority. Obviously, in this Feast of Pentecost, we're looking at the beginnings of the church, the seeds, the creative minority, that if they hadn't been propelled by the Holy Spirit and gone out and engaged and spoken to the culture, and all the ways in which they engage with all aspects of the culture, particularly we see Paul going to the religious leaders, the political leaders, all across, then the church obviously wasn't going to grow. The society wasn't going to be transformed by the seeds of the gospel message. Just in terms of lay people, because Ralph Martin again was before us was speaking about the role of everybody in the church to take part in the mission of the church. Specifically yourself, what would you see in terms of, the Second Vatican Council in its document Lumen Gentium speaks about lay people being a leaven in society. What would you think that is referring to today, and how might that be affected by lay people in their day-to-day, those that are taking their faith seriously? What might they be challenged to do, and how might they maybe go about doing it?
I think probably a couple of things. One of them is to lead by example, to be examples of what it is to be a person of faith and to be a person of joy in that faith. Very, very often, if you talk to people who aren't Christian, who aren't Catholic, they see Christians as essentially joyless, or if they don't see them as joyless, they see them as naively happy. And we need to kind of model that example in a way, and honestly do so, of being and of Christians being people who are realists, and that doesn't mean cynics. It means people who see the world as it is and still believe there's a reason to go forward, still believe there's a reason to hope. And we can do that in culture very obviously. That's clearly something we should do. Connected with that, I think we have to join dots. Rachel mentioned Tolkien earlier. Infinite numbers of people have read Tolkien's books. The number of them who realize that this is coming from a deeply Christian, deeply Catholic place is, I think, negligible. And one of our challenges is to say, look, it's not an allegory, but nonetheless, this is Christian culture. This is a sacramental imagination at work here. And you'll get more out of it if you can look at it through Catholic eyes. And so just as we're called to create things with Catholic hands, we're called to look on things and to listen to things with Catholic eyes and ears, bringing a Catholic mind to play. And that's for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks a million, Greg. I'd like to just propose a question for all of you to consider and just get your individual input on it. So at the moment, there doesn't seem to be much of a crossover between the world of arts and the world of the church in Ireland today. What can we, as Catholics, try to do about this? So maybe I could start with Father Conor, if you can speak to that question. Just one second, Conor, we just don't have the audio feed for you just yet.
That was my mistake. I was cleverly muting myself, something you probably wanted to do many times during our religious life.
No comment.
So I think one of the things we can do is to be inspired by the treasures of Christian Ireland. This is something I think we don't do often enough, to reclaim our wonderful heritage. So I'm thinking of two things. The landscape of Ireland is covered in monastic ruins, which are often wonderful places to go and visit. There's a great website, monastic.ie, and there you can find maps and information about different monastic sites. And so if you go and visit places like Clonmacnoise or Lismore, or even smaller places like Cologne and Annadown, I think they have an enormous impact on your soul just by being there in the presence of those stones. And also I'd encourage people to visit museums. The National Museum in Dublin on Kildare Street, and the Chester Beatty Library has an incredible collection of biblical papyri. The earliest fragments of John's Gospel and Paul's letters are there. Amazing Christian books on display. And also local museums, like in Loughrea, for example, there's wonderful things in the Diocesan Museum there. And when you visit these places, I think you're inspired very much by what previous generations have done. You feel sort of a continuity with these past generations, each of which was a creative generation. And so you feel inspired again to do something like that in our own time as well.
Great. Thanks, Conor. Rachel, maybe if I can come to you next with the same question. You spoke earlier on about being creative in your own right. So this overlap between the culture and the church and influencing it in Ireland today, how might we?
Yeah, well, I think contribute? What I would do is, I would really echo everything that the other people have been saying, is that, meeting the culture is important, and having an element of fearlessness about saying that it is important also for us to reach out to the culture that exists. It's not just about waiting for people to come to us. I think that there can be a sense that we can be intimidated by the culture. It seems so far away from what we believe and what we want to express. But I think the wrong thing to do is to just dismiss it all out of hand, because what you're saying there is, if you're refusing to engage with that culture, you're refusing to engage with the people who made it. And you're on some level saying, you have nothing to say to me. And so why would they ever think that we have anything to say to them? You have to be willing to explore the things that they're saying and the reasons why they're saying it. It was like Father Conor said about like searching for that gold in amongst all of the rubble. And, when we do that, yes, we will come across a lot of things that make us very uncomfortable, and we will find that things are not the way that we would like them to be. But I think that one of the things that we can do is really train ourselves to be able to consume culture in a healthy and Catholic way, which is to say that first of all, that you don't dismiss it. Second of all, that you don't just accept all of it and say, well, this is what's popular, so it must be good. But to cut a middle path where you're able to say, like with a movie, to watch it and say, well, there are parts in this that contradict what I believe to be the truth of God's reality for the world, and contradict it in a harmful way. But maybe there are these good bits, and I should show a spotlight on them and say, this is the reason why you like this story. This is the reason why it speaks to you. And so we have to be able to articulate why stories and art and music speaks to us before we can say these parts are the ones that resonate most deeply with your soul. I think we can be very muddled when we're consuming culture, because first of all, there's an element of taste to it. So not everything will be to your taste. Even when everything is gloriously Catholic and perfectly made in communion with God, there will still be things that aren't necessarily to your particular taste. So you have to be able to separate yourself from your own personal taste and culture. And then the other thing that we have to make sure we don't do is that just because something either offends us or unsettles us, we assume that means that it contradicts us. And it's important to acknowledge when it does contradict us, but it's also important to recognize that as much as we've talked about beauty as being this sort of glorious and uplifting thing, beauty can also be very unsettling. And the other transcendentals that I mentioned convey this maybe a little more clearly. Like, the truth is profoundly disturbing sometimes, that when it's presented to us. And so is the good. Like, when you see like the extent of charity of someone like Mother Teresa, that should leave you feeling not comfortable with yourself and asking, what are you supposed to be doing? And so when you encounter beauty, it can be almost an unsettling thing. I think of, in the Narnia stories, that C.S. Lewis's great depiction of the Christ character of Aslan. But the line about it is he's not a tame lion. The path to salvation is not always cozy. And so stories by broken people who are full of sin, that portray stories about people being broken and full of sin, are actually part of the Christian perspective. And yes, there will sometimes be elements in that we should reject as Catholics, but there's also elements that you have to enter into and say that this is a brokenness that the church needs to speak to, but people need to express that brokenness before we can speak to it.
Great. Yes, thanks a million, Rachel. Just when you were talking about, engaging with the culture and discerning it as well, it just made me think, because I'm just reading a book by Bishop Barron at the moment, Seeds of the Word. And of course, those who know Bishop Barron knows that he very much engages and looks at and tries to find those seeds of the word. And in that particular book, he's all about analysing different films and seeing where the Christological elements are, where the Christian elements, and in drawing it out and kind of trying to see the good that society is, the culture is trying to propose, and then maybe point out where they've, gone away from the Christian message. But, so we don't dismiss everything out of hand. Yeah. But we try and find the good in it.
I think the work that Bishop Barron and Word on Fire does is so inspirational. It's been immensely inspirational. It's kind of been one of my major starting points in the work that I've done, and the way that he's able to delve into culture. And I think film is a really good way to start encountering the culture, because to me, I always see film as like, it's such a new form of storytelling. We haven't had this until the last couple of decades. So it's a place where people are really coming to express themselves in ways that aren't so regimented, that we expect we know what to expect when we get a novel. We know what to expect when we get a song on a certain level, but film is definitely a new area. So I think, and I'm sure Andrew would back me up on this, but yeah, film is definitely an area that I think that we should be paying attention to.
Great, absolutely. I'm just hearing in my ear that we just have under 10 minutes left, so I'd love to be able to draw on the rest of the panelists on that particular question, but there's two more questions I want to get to before we're out of time. So if I could just move on to that, just Rachel, while I have you still there, and I'll address this to yourself and Greg. You're involved in new projects about faith and culture. Could you tell us a bit about them in a couple of minutes before we wrap up? So Rachel.
Yes. So, like I said, I was hugely inspired by Bishop Barron. And so I set up my own podcast called Risking Enchantment, which is all about art and beauty and culture, and looking at it through a Catholic lens and saying, like, how can this inspire us and inform our faith? And so we could take a fairly broad range of things that we've done over 30 episodes so far. And we've done everything from sort of like Christian classics like moral integrity in the novels of Jane Austen, all the way to, we did one on violent films and Catholic audiences and how you can reconcile those two things. And so we take a pretty broad view. We do some unusual ones. We did one on the Catholic perspective of detective fiction. But the thing that I wanted to do with this podcast is to encourage people to think critically and to open their horizons to the great novels and stories and art that can inspire us, I think, and to take something that can be quite complex and academic and dry and distill it down into a conversation that's very listenable, it's very accessible. My favorite feedback is when people say that they saw a topic come up for one of the episodes and say, oh, I thought I'd have no interest in that, but then I listened and actually it was really fascinating. And I've been fortunate enough to have that be a response that I've had a lot of great responses. I've also had people who are not Catholic coming to it from a culture perspective and saying, well, this really opened up my eyes to seeing a Catholic perspective on it. So it works both ways. It's about allowing Catholics to think seriously and critically and deeply about culture and how it can inspire, and also the other way, that opening up the door to Catholicism to people who are interested in culture. So, it's available on the podcast apps across all of the phones and on my website, which is rachelsherlock.com, if anyone wants to listen. But I'm really pleased with the response that I've had. I've been very, very blessed to have a very positive response to it.
Great. And again, the name of it is Risking Enchantment for those who are looking in online who want to look it up. Greg, in 2 minutes, if you can let us know about a new project that you're going to be involved in coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that it follows on from talking about Rachel's there, because her podcast is definitely one of the things that fed into what I'd like to do. I've been thinking over the last few months and kind of working around and getting quite a bit of help on this one about putting together a digital magazine, so like a PDF thing, a bi-monthly, based on looking at the world through primarily an Irish Catholic optic. Again, it's that idea of us being a creative minority and not forgetting the creative bit. Also remembering that, as Irish people, there is great stuff coming from America, from Britain, wherever, but we've got to do our own. And it very much takes on board the idea of C.S. Lewis, who once rejected, as Alexander Pope used to say, that the proper study of mankind is man. And Lewis said, no, the proper study of mankind is everything. So basically looking for a kind of a smart, thoughtful magazine, bringing an Irish Catholic optic to bear on everything from arts, travel, cinema, economics, science, current affairs, whatever it might be, as long as it gives kind of a broad Catholic lens and tests things, going back to Conor's point about taking the gold from Egypt, test things to see what is true, so we can look at anything. Basically, nothing is off the table as long as we can do this. So I'd be aiming to have that ready for the start of October. That's the plan.
Helping or discussing, you never know. So great. Delighted to hear about that project from Rachel and what's upcoming from yourself, Greg. Andrew, can I just turn to you again in the last dying minutes of our discussion? Just in the world of faith and culture at the moment, you're going to be diving into it now because you're obviously be looking for inspiration. You're trying to influence that area. What's exciting you at the moment?
Something that is really exciting in that area is actually a show that I've been telling all my friends and family about, called The Chosen. And The Chosen it's essentially about the journey of Christ and the Apostles. So far, they only have one season that they've put up online, but it's free to access. They have it on YouTube along with some live streams of the director, Dallas Jenkins, talking about the behind-the-scenes material and how they're creating the show. But essentially, it's a really interesting and engaging storyline on Jesus and the Apostles. And what I really love about it is just how human and how real they make the characters. It's something that's very relatable in a certain sense. I think in a way they have not necessarily modernized the person of Christ. That would be a little far, but I can see how they have translated a lot of kind of the humor and Christ's teachings just in a really amazing and engaging way. I love the show myself. I've been watching it I've actually watched it twice now. So I'm on my second time around of the first season, but they're developing a second season. They're getting funding for it now. That's something that's really caught my eye. I've been talking to, I had a chat with the director of photography from that show a few days ago, talking to him about his experience on the set. And I was also talking to Jonathan, the man who plays Jesus. And overall, I've just been finding a very genuine sense of mission in the people working on the show. Which is another reason I just really want people to take a look and find it for themselves, because it's well worth supporting, and it's deepened my my prayer life. It actually helps me envision the person of Christ in a much more profound way. And I have friends who say the same thing, and family members. So I'd highly recommend taking a look at it.
And I can completely echo all you've said, because I just finished watching the series, so it's great that you just mentioned it. I thought it was absolutely excellent, because I was a little bit hesitant, because obviously we've had the Passion of the Christ, and there was the Bible series that was produced as well not so long ago, and the follow-up AD. So a little bit hesitant, because you're always wary. Watched it, bowled over by it. So I can't recommend it highly enough. Get the app on your phone; it's free. Get YouTube videos, excellent, really well done. Okay. Panel members Greg, Fr Conor, Rachel and Andrew, thank you so much for contributing to our discussion.